Hello. So this is another video in the series that I've titled Crossing Cultures, meaning how do we teach the gospel cross-culturally? Because depending upon the culture that we're in, there's various different learning styles and ways that people take in information. And so my premise is that we ought to consider adjusting our communication methods and techniques and approaches in order to best teach the people that we're communicating with in these foreign cultures. So today I want to share just one very practical technique that I've implemented in my teaching of the gospel and of the Bible to more oral learners here in Sierra Leone, West Africa. Hello, welcome back to the channel. My name is Dan, and this is my channel, Mindful Missionary. My family has been living in the West African country of Sierra Leone for almost a couple years now, and we moved here for the purpose of teaching the gospel, of building up the brethren, and evangelizing the message of Christ. And one of the biggest adjustments we've had to make in living here had really nothing to do with the lifestyle differences or the increased poverty or the underdevelopment, but rather the different culture that we're living in, the different learning styles that people are adapted to in this culture. And so that's one thing that we prayerfully and are considerate of trying to adjust how we talk, how we communicate, how we teach in this culture. And so in a previous video, I talked about the pros and cons of teaching to a primarily oral culture and society, meaning the majority of people that I'm teaching here in both Sierra Leone are not very experienced or equipped learners via reading, but rather they learn more naturally through more oral methods. And so in a previous video, I shared about how we can adapt our teaching to more oral standards, which means we're going to use a lot of repetition, a lot of illustration, and a lot of participation in our teaching to help people be able to grasp what we're teaching, but also help them to remember so that when they're teaching their friends, their families, they'll be equipped with that knowledge to be able to impart that to the next person. So in teaching to people who live in a culture that are not very experienced and well-equipped in reading and writing, we need to be creative regarding the type of methods and techniques we use in communicating to people here in a way that they'll remember, in a way that'll really stick with them. So one of those creative ideas that was shown to me, and I've kind of implemented it in my own way, as what every teacher needs to do, kind of make it their own, is this idea of giving your audience, giving your students, giving those you're teaching, a visual marker of the various points you're making within a Bible class. And so this could be done either via a textual Bible study, going through a narrative or going through a story, going through a chapter of the Bible, or a more topical one. And so I use them for both. And so this is a fairly simple thing, but I just use it with the various objects inside my backpack. And so, for example, I want to give you an example of both a topical and textual study that I'll teach and how I implement this method. But one very common Bible class that I teach here is regarding the kingdom of God. It's a throughout theme of the Bible of how the gospel was preached in terms of a kingdom kind of concept. And so it's important for us today to see our relationship with God, our relationship with our brethren, our service to God, as really aligning and seeing that in a kingdom kind of concept. And so one point that I make is that every kingdom has a king. And so for the rest of the Bible study, this water bottle, this object will represent that point, that every kingdom has a king. And then the next point will be every kingdom has a law, okay? And so I'll put this one down here. Now all I'm doing is I'm really briefly just summarizing every point. Every kingdom has a territory, okay? Has a specific land or boundary to their dominion. Every kingdom has a people or has citizens within that kingdom. And then finally, just some sunglasses, every kingdom has an enemy or has a danger or a threat. So after I've kind of introduced all these various points and given an object that is a visual marker of that point, then I'll start back at the first point, develop this more, talking about, okay, every kingdom has a king, and who's the king inside God's kingdom? Well, he placed Jesus on the throne of that kingdom. And talk more about that. That it's not, is it possible to have more than one king in a kingdom? Well, no. So that means there's no room for me. There's no room for you. It's no room for my pastor. It's no room. There is one king inside this kingdom. His authority is the one that we need to follow. And so I'll obviously develop that more, make some more applications regarding that. And then at the end of me kind of expounding more about that aspect, then I'll ask, all right, every kingdom has a, and then there's the room for both repetition and participation. I'll ask the student or ask the person I'm teaching to be able to answer. Every kingdom has a king. And who's our king? Jesus. Okay. And then after I've reviewed this one, then I go to point number 2. Every kingdom has a law. And then I'll obviously expound more about that. Who's the lawmaker inside a kingdom? Well, the king is, and he's the only one who can make law. And it's not, anyway, and talk about, even in our own country, what happens when you break a law. There's penalties and there's expectations for following a law and all this kind of stuff. And then once we're done with this one, then before introducing this third one or coming back to this third point, we'll start back at 1. Every kingdom has a king. Who is the king? Jesus. Every kingdom has a law. Who gives our law? Who's our lawmaker in our kingdom? It's Jesus, not me. The third one, territory. Okay, and then the next one's going to be citizens. What kind of people? And then this the danger. What kind of threats are there to people who live inside God's kingdom? But the idea is every time that I move on to a new point, I start back at number 1 and go through. So I'm repeating it probably at least 15 to 20 times throughout the course of the lesson. Again, repetition is key when you don't have access or not equipped in taking well-written notes. And so this is a way of being able to repeat that. And so at the end of Bible class, they don't need me to say anything. I'll just point to one object and they'll be able to review the major points that I made about that point. And same thing all the way through. So this could be done both with a topical study, as I've illustrated, but also a narrative or a textual study. And so you can tell stories this exact same way. When a story has lots of characters or different, kind of events within that story, again, just think of it as breaking down your lesson into various kind of chapters and then giving a visual marker for every one of those events or, kind of encounters within that story. And so this is an example of one textual class. So I'll kind of get smaller objects here because there'll be more of them. So one story that I teach a lot is the starting and the development of the church in Antioch in Acts chapter 11. I did a video about this not too long ago. But anyway, so how I would illustrate and use this method for this particular narrative textual Bible class is I'll share, I'll read the text kind of verse by verse, and then as I read verse by verse, I'll give a visual marker for every major event that I want them to remember and review as we go through. And so the first one's going to be a few men entered the city of Antioch. And so this item from this point forward is a few men enter the city of Antioch. Okay, and I'll repeat it back 2 or 3 times before I put it down. And the next part is they preach Jesus to the people of this city. They preach Jesus. So they come and then they preach Jesus. And then the next event, this hand sanitizer here, beaucoup people dem, or many people turn to Jesus as a result of preaching Jesus. And so people enter the city, they preach Jesus, people turn to Jesus, okay? And then this guy's going to be Barnabas. Barnabas is sent from the church in Jerusalem to the church in Antioch to check things out. He goes into the city. Barnabas goes into the city, and then he exhorts them to remain true to the Lord. Remain true to the Lord, okay? So he exhorts them to stay loyal to the Lord. The next point is, the next detail in the text is that because of him, many people are brought to the Lord with the continued teaching that happens there. And then the next one is, but the idea is every single time I put down a new marker, I'm reviewing from start to where I'm at in the lesson, going through this again and again and again. And the story actually goes on. I think that story maybe has 9 different chapters, 9 different visual markers, different divisions in the text that shows a pattern of if I want people that turn to the Lord, what do I need to preach? Well, what preceded this point? If I want people who turn to the Lord, I need to preach the Lord, right? If I want people to remain true to the Lord, okay, I need preaching and exhortation regarding remaining true to the Lord. And then I'll make some illustrations regarding, hey, you know, if we want to preach the church, who will people turn to? Will they turn to Jesus or will they turn to a church? And we want people that are converted to Christ, not necessarily to his body specifically. So anyway, and this kind of story goes on, and it's amazing how well people here are able to remember and memorize this style of learning. Some stories that I've taught, I've gone about 15 deep. 15 visual markers deep. And at the end of my lesson, again, I've reviewed. They're the ones reviewing as I point to every object. At the end of the lesson, they're able to go 15 deep into some of these stories, which is incredible. So their memorization abilities really far surpass my expectations and really my own abilities, because that's just how they are more naturally learning here. And so this is something that can be done out of just simple objects that you have in your bag, simple objects that I carry around with me. It's a bonus if you're able to represent a certain object that maybe also counts as an illustration. So, just off the top of my head here, thinking about, well, when people turn to Jesus, Jesus washes away their sin, and this is hand sanitizer. And so maybe I might make a play on that, maybe. Or maybe the marker might. Anyway, so there are different things that you can do if you want to put more thought into what objects you use for each one. There's more room there for being able to help people remember and really impress upon them the story and the things you're teaching them. And finally, I'll just share that this method is not unique to me. This was shown to me by a preacher who's been making some short visits to Sierra Leone and done some study on the methods and techniques of orality. However, I just kind of adapt it as it makes sense to me. And this probably only takes maybe half an hour to an hour more time in your preparation to kind of look at your material, look at your text, look at your topic, and kind of find out where those divisions are that would fit a visual marker for that. You also take some work to kind of try to summarize every point you're making into something that could be repeated back. But I always felt like there's just so much benefit to doing that. I've always felt like at the end of my Bible class that I employed this method, that it really helped the people I was teaching understand, remember, and then be able to teach that to the people in their lives that maybe I'm not able to. And so I think this is a great technique. This is not the only technique out there, certainly. And I don't think this is an essential thing for learning. I think it's possible for people in Sierra Leone to learn without doing something like this. But I think those of us who are teaching the gospel, we're willing to do anything we can to make our efforts more fruitful for the Lord, for his kingdom, and for the people we're teaching. And so this is just one thing that I've been trying to do more frequently to help the people that I'm teaching really get what I'm trying to share with them. In the future, I'll be sharing a few other very practical techniques. This is just one of many that I've been implementing. Again, the pillars of orality are participation, illustration, and repetition. And so this is one method that allows me to utilize all three of those in a way that I think is helpful. Thanks so much for watching. I'm still a work in progress. There's still a lot that I'm learning regarding communication and how to do that effectively here in Sierra Leone. But I think this method has been really helpful for me, and I think could be really helpful in many cultures where the people that we're teaching are less and less dependent upon reading and writing. Again, thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next video.